Welcome back to Who Made You the Boss? This week, we're joined by Allison Hare, a celebrated personal branding coach and host of the award-winning Reinvention Room podcast. We're going to explore life's transitions with confidence and purpose. Allison is a friend, and I'm excited for you all to get to know her too. She's a former corporate sales executive turned lifestyle and career coach, and she now helps high-performing women redesign their lives for greater alignment and joy. Today, she is sharing her proven framework for combating burnout and how that works to balance masculine and feminine energies, as well as setting boundaries that empower growth. So whether you are facing a big change or seeking to rediscover your passions, doesn't matter if you're male or female, this episode is full of actionable insights. You want even more actionable insights? Make sure you visit our Substack after the episode for exclusive tools and deeper reflections that build on today's conversation. You can check that out at lindsayepperly.substack.com. Okay, Allison, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Listeners, Allison and I just connected recently in a professional group, but then also she interviewed me for her podcast. You're the only podcast that I've gone on to talk about the transition that I've had out of the CEO role of Jet Set and into whatever is next. And that's because you are just the queen of transitions and of reinvention. And it's everything you've built your entire coaching practice on. And I thought it would be so helpful for listeners to hear more about your thought process behind what that looks like and apply it to each of their lives too.
Yeah, I think it would probably be a good idea to start a little bit of backstory that when I was a teenager, I was raised by a stay-at-home mom of 6 kids. Mm-hmm. So my mother did not work, and she beat it into me and my sisters' heads. Allison and my sisters, never rely on a man to make money. Always make your own. So she always kind of operated from this place of, please don't do what I did. And so I kind of had something that flipped in my head where I'm like, okay, I'm never going to do that. I'm going to work my butt off. And it was celebrated. You know, we're celebrated for a hustle culture. We are taught you can do anything, you can be anything. And you say, yeah, I can do all of that. And also, it is required you stay skinny, you stay slim, you always stay calm and composed. You never be too elevated or escalated or too out there. And so I really kind of played by the rules where I think my natural nature was, I don't know if it was rebellion, but it wasn't always in the box, right? Like I never really fit in any neat box. And I always had these passions that I just kind of put on the shelf. You know, I have a degree in broadcasting. I ended up throughout my whole career always choosing the money, what was stable. So I built my career in corporate sales. So corporate executive sales, did that for 20 plus years. And about 2 years ago, it's kind of a funny story, but I really was feeling just profoundly burned out. And I go to a tarot reading, and the tarot reader says, Allison, it's time for you to leave your job. And I somehow took that as a sign and somehow convinced my husband, give me 6 months, let me figure out what I'm going to do. And so I kind of went on this odyssey to essentially start my own business and really kind of flare up all of the creative engines that were always there, but always kind of put on the back burner. And I partnered with a personal brand strategy firm where it just felt like there are so many options that are available to us today that, you know, it's almost like, what if we could take what we are passionate about and put a structure and a strategy around it that almost anything is possible if you do it the right way. I'm not saying just hope in a prayer and quit everything and figure something out. There is a sensible and practical way to be able to build something, or even take what you have and make it more creative and more full of yourself, and rather than sit in a box. So I don't know if that's a good place to start, but that's kind of the backstory.
Yes. No, thank you for that, because it gives me so many threads to pull on. And also, I didn't know you had that backstory with your mom. My story is actually really similar with my mom. She was a stay-at-home mom.
Really?
She encouraged me in the same way. And so even though I got to see entrepreneurship modeled by my father, I got to see independence modeled by my mother, because she would say the same thing. Don't rely on a man. Don't rely on a man. And so it's interesting how that
Wow.
kind of shapes us. But I
Yeah.
have so many questions for you and directions we can take this. But your story, I think, is so similar to a lot of individuals who kind of pursue what society's definition of success is to begin with. And that's a very masculine energy, masculine definition
Yeah.
of success. And so the idea of living in kind of more of a creative or flow state feels like stepping more into a feminine energy. And our listeners are both male and female, but I just want to call
Sure.
this out because I think that women oftentimes go a similar path because we hear what success is supposed to look like. And I really want to talk about, you mentioned, there's a right way to go about this. And I saw when I was reading up on you on your website that you had many conventional and unconventional ways of going about this
Yeah.
yourself. So it sounds like you have tried all the ways. And I want to hear a little bit more about like what path, if an individual finds themselves in a position right now where they're like, gosh, I know, and we're gonna talk about this in a second. I know I've outgrown my container. I know that there's something that I'm pressing up against, and burnout's telling me that is my body's way of
Yeah.
saying it's time to evolve. I know it's time to evolve. What is the first step for that individual? What is the right way?
Yeah, and I think where this could be really helpful for your listeners is a process I take my clients through, and it is a boom room and bloom. And really, I think that the people that we talk to that feel like they are overscheduled, they're burned out, a lot of times they have the energy, it's just being placed in the wrong thing. And so and not the wrong thing, it just doesn't feel as fresh as it may once have done. You might even be bored even though you're completely packed out.
Mm.
And part of it is like activating your brain in a different way. And so I define burnout as when your dreams and your passions are no longer aligned with your daily activities, and that is where there's a little bit of a disconnect. And that friction is what we feel, where we feel the discomfort. So what I always encourage people to do, and it'll take you 3 minutes to quickly make a list of 10 things that bring you energy. And it could be something so small as like savoring a cup of tea, because you can't like pound a cup of tea like you could coffee. But it is like even the enjoyment of like stepping outside. I know it sounds cheesy, but like stepping outside and just breathing in the air, because it signals to your brain to actually calm down and to slow down. So, kind of making a list of 10 things, even like looking at the moon and admiring how beautiful it is, or a butterfly, or dance or movement or some kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be a trip to Bali, although I recommend jet set world travel if that is in your
Well, thank you for the plug.
if that's part of it, but like those tiny little things, you start to actually put deposits, because when we're so overstretched and so overscheduled and burned out, when it feels like we're in survival mode, that there literally is no movement available because you are too packed out. So part of it is like finding those little deposits of, where do I get truly my energy sources? For me, I love pulling weeds. I don't like planting things, but I love pulling weeds. It brings me so much joy. I don't do it often, but when I do it, I'm like, why don't I do this more? And so part of it is like giving yourself permission to take 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And the other thing I always encourage people to do is to do like the happy calendar challenge, where you take your calendar for a week and you color it in. So all the events, there's no judgment here really. Color in like a bright highlighter yellow of the things that bring you energy, the meetings that you
Mhm.
have that bring you energy. And then maybe a darker color for ones that you feel are really draining. And then there are some that are like obligatory, like you got to pick up your kids. You do need to pick up dry cleaning and groceries or whatever that is. And take a look at it and see how much bright you have on there, how much dark. And then being able to potentially reposition some of those. Sometimes we feel like we are a slave to the calendar, but you truly are at choice. And a lot of time it's just making those tiny, tiny choices, where you can maybe take one meeting off a week. That could have been an email, or may seem obligatory, but isn't really going to move the needle for you. It's more
Mhm.
like FaceTime. So part of it is like really setting the boundary for yourself that I need some space and I'm going to bow out of this and life is going to move on. So the boom part is finding energy. Room is like expansion, the boundaries, like setting boundaries and finding more space where you may not see any today. And then the third part is I call the bloom, which is creative experimentation. That once you have a little bit of energy and a little bit of space, then you can start to play around and really see what is it that really lights me up and what is possible for me if I'm feeling kind of stuck or squished in, like the current environment.
Yes. Um, Thank you for that. I love the idea of the happy calendar challenge. That is such a fun way to put that because so often that is a draining part of our lives because we just overschedule, overmeet, overdo it, and don't realize where our energy is going. And it's interesting too because I want to speak to those individuals where this is resonating and you're thinking, oh, okay, I have been looking for a change. I have been looking to make something different in my life to give myself more energy. I think a philosophy that you've introduced me to recently, Allison, and you have a beautiful podcast episode on the Reinvention Room about this, that is all about the problem with healing, is what the title of that episode is. And I'm going to link to it
Yeah.
in our show notes. But the way you put this, and you're the type of friend that when I talk to you, I actually bring a notepad and I just write a bunch of notes because of what you say is so wise. But the way you put this, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to actually literally read my note from the last time you and I talked, is you are not broken. You've just outgrown your container. And so I want to give the listeners here permission to understand, sometimes we think there's something wrong with us and we think like, gosh, I'm so burnt out. And then we go listen to all these self-help podcasts and we find out that not only am I not burned out, I need to lose weight and also need to drink more water. And what are electrolytes anyway? And like all these things that we start
Yes.
realizing, we think that something's wrong with us. We think that something is broken. And talk to me about that, about this philosophy that you have, that's really not the case. And sometimes we overdo it on the self-help situation.
And through no fault of our own, truly. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And there was this one time, this was last year, where I was like overdosing on self-help, where I was like, you know, I was listening to all the podcasts. I'm like, oh, that's such a great title. Maybe this will give me the relief that I need. And at the time, I was also feeling burned out and not sure where I was going to go and wanted some clarity on some things. And I remember I was actually going, I mentioned, or you mentioned that I have done some unconventional things. One of the things that I found is I found I love endurance challenges. And I was going on a trip to North Carolina and I was going to scale the tallest peak of North Carolina solo. I'd never done that before. It was the longest I've ever hiked. And do it alone where there are bears and those kind of things. I'm not really trained, I don't think I even had bear spray. And going there, and I had this 4-hour drive to go to North Carolina because I live in Atlanta, like you do, Atlanta area. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to listen to all this self-help books and podcasts. And when I was looking at, the podcast list, all of the titles were how to fix,
Mm.
how to improve when this sucks. Are you a perfectionist? Are you a people pleaser? Everything was like named. And it almost felt like they were inventing psychoses that I didn't even know I had. They were inventing problems I didn't even know I had, but I felt seen. I was like, wow, I guess I do struggle with this. And what I started to notice is that every single podcast I turned on, I felt worse and worse. So if I'm consuming all of this self-help and all of this personal development and always trying to optimize and learning and being curious, why do I feel worse? And what I realized is that as I started to see the mountains come in view, I turned everything off and I was like, this is not helping. This is making things worse. I shut it off and I rode in the quiet, and everything felt like a wave of calm and joy and sovereignty. And I felt like restorative, and I felt like, wait, I am whole. I don't need any of this. And I don't need anybody telling me that I'm broken. I've just outgrown where I was. It's like wearing clothes that are too tight that you used to love, and maybe now they're a little bit tattered and they don't fit the same way. And part of it is like finding clothes in rooms that just fit better because you are moving on, you're evolving.
it resonated so much with me because, as you know, and as we've talked about, I'm in a very recent career transition, and by the time this airs,
Yeah.
it'll be several months removed from that. But as we speak right now, I mean, it's like, gosh, so many people have followed up and asked me like, how did you know when it was time to move on? And it was a two-part answer for me because I had to consider both myself and the business I had created. So I'm thinking about that analogy of the clothes we outgrow. And it's not just simply outgrowing because that almost made it feel like, well, am I leaving this thing behind that I've outgrown? In some ways, it also outgrew me, right? Like we just began growing in two separate directions. But how do we, with love and graciousness, steward those things that we've outgrown, right? That's some of the question that I had to ask myself of like, how do I make
Yeah.
sure that I set this up for success and don't just light fire and step away from it, right? So I
Yeah.
think maybe that's where some of us get stuck is we think, oh goodness, maybe I have outgrown this, but I don't know how to gracefully step away. So what would you
Yeah.
say to someone struggling with that?
This is where I love the concept of creative experiments and creative
Mm,
exploration. Um, one of the things that I did is I walked away from my career on purpose without a plan. And I don't recommend this approach. And looking back, I wonder if I could have done it easier or done it differently, which is like experimenting and like not being so serious or so precious that I've got to just set this on fire, walk away, F everything. That's not what this is. There's so much love and passion, and it's almost like there are, I'll kind of do a tangent, but bring it back. One of the things that I've noticed that I've talked about a lot is that post pandemic, people like you and I, and people that are entrepreneurs and high performing women, they struggle a lot with their personal relationships because they've invested so much time and energy and I think friendships get deprioritized in service of our career, our family, and all of them are important, right? And so I think after the pandemic, everyone has kind of reevaluated their
mm,
own relationships, whether, you are intentionally investing in the relationships going forward. And you may be in a position where and it's not that you've outgrown, maybe there's a better word for it, but it just is different. It no longer fits the way it used to. But that doesn't mean that there isn't honor and respect and
mm,
joy. I mean, there are people that I don't really talk to or spend time with that were godsends to me. And I love and honor them deeply. But for where I am right now, sometimes you have to keep it a little bit at an arm's length and figure out where do you land. And you may be in the
mm.
receiving end where you may have some of your friendships that have shifted and changed where you're no longer being called as much, where that relationship changes. So there is a little bit of a grief that goes with leaving and changing, or the potential of leaving and really identifying what is going to work for you in the future. But it really is being in a place where the person who you are today, it almost is like repositioning the chess pieces a little more instead of like throwing the chessboard away and starting
Yeah.
over.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
almost
I
like
feel that.
recategorizing, like recategorizing
Yeah. Well,
where
and it's
they
interesting.
are.
Interesting that you parallel it to a friendship because I mean, our careers are
The
relationships. And
relationships. Yeah.
we do get to pull, there's that old adage, friends for a reason and friends for a season. And I think that
Yeah.
that could also be applied to our careers, right? Sometimes we are in a reason, we are pursuing our passion, we are pursuing our purpose, and this is what keeps us going. That's the through line for all of it. And sometimes it's a season because that was the vehicle that got us from A to B. And now it's time to get out and change vehicles. And so I like that analogy. I think that that honors it because I didn't want to feel like I had outgrown. It's simply we had both evolved in a different way, we being myself and being the business. And it's interesting that you talk about grieving too, because I can say, having recently stepped out of that role, I had a very unexpected period of grief where it was just waves on waves. And
Yeah.
um, I thought because I had been planning for this for so long, because I had come to peace with it, because it was the best decision for both myself and the business, that I would feel nothing but just joy and light and love. And like the
Right.
minute I said that speech, I had to run to the bathroom and I just lost it. Like it was like,
Mm.
wow. And in some ways, I look back at that, there was like a 48-hour period where I was just truly mourning. And I think, oh, that was actually one way to honor this. Like that was letting that
A
grief kind of like
hundred
flood
percent.
through us, pass through us, and not just saying like, okay, I'm done with this now, like, but actually
Yeah.
honoring the relationship and knowing that the relationship has changed was very helpful to me.
Yeah, I think the morning piece is something that I am hoping to have more discussion around where it's just acknowledging it. Like I did a speech on rebuilding your inner circle after your pandemic to a group of female lawyers. We were at a retreat. And after the speech, I had so many people come up to me and like quietly tell me, I really am struggling with my relationship with my best friend. I don't know why she seems so different now, but I also am a lawyer. I have busy things. Like, do I bring it up? It's just, I think the relationship piece in general is something that requires a little more nuance and also inviting the broad spectrum of feelings, especially the mourning and the grief aspect of it to to move on in a healthy way without burning the boats, as they say, or,
Mhm.
not doing it in a dignified way, I think is the only way, and requires us to step up in a different way. And part of that is like, using the muscle that you may not have used, because we are taught to just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep
Mm.
going. Like these feelings are bad, these feelings are good. Just like you having that binary thought around, well, everything will be sunshine and rainbows and puppy dogs. I'm only looking forward. Bye, everybody. That wasn't
Yeah.
it at all.
Yeah.
It's
So true.
part of the fabric that makes this quilt of yours beautiful and rich and full of history and legacy. There's so much there.
It's so true. But I would say when you're in like the depth of that burnout, sometimes the only decision you think you have access to is the burning it all down. I think sometimes you just get
Yeah.
into like a very blinders on way of thinking and you can't see a way out of that. And I'm guilty of that before too. I'm very fortunate to have had my husband as my business partner during that time
Yeah.
to look at it and say, could before you do that, actually, could you let me step up? And I went, well, sure, that's fine. But like it was otherwise, I don't know that I would have seen the steps to take out of it. And it was about a 4-year process to actually gracefully exit in that way. Uh,
Yeah.
and I had the luxury of time in a partnership, but I think when someone is in a really deep season of burnout, they think like it's only this way, it's only a negative way. But there are actually with time and clarity. And it sounds like the the tips that you are giving are not just quick fixes. These are long-term solutions of how do we get ourselves out of this state into a place where we have more room and then into a place where we can expand beyond that. And that answers the
Yes.
question of what's next, not a quick fix, but a long-term solution.
Yeah, 100%. And I think even the time that it takes, all I kept thinking when you were talking about is how important it is to have a coach or a mentor or a trusted advisor or somebody in your world that can be objective to you, that can first of all hear you. Like having a place to actually say out loud. There's so many of these women entrepreneur groups that I've been in, when you go around and almost all of them are like, I feel a sense of loneliness because I'm running the show here. I'm not going to tell people that I work with that I'm really struggling and need help or need time for me. I need somebody that is going to hear me and allow me to just let my guard down,
Yeah.
because the guard and like always kind of being poised, you have to just you have to let the guard down a little bit, and having somebody trusted to be able to help you navigate this. I think for me, you're right. You hit it on the head when you said it isn't an all or nothing kind of thing. They're tiny little micro steps and micro changes and micro decisions that give you, it's almost like putting that wedge in the door. I call it fractures of light. It's kind of like if you're
Mhm.
an egg, right? And that you're squished inside the egg and the egg starts to crack. You start to push on those cracks and you realize there's light there. So what
Yeah.
happens if you keep pushing on that? But sometimes you need permission from somewhere else to give you permission to let something go or to shift something or to make a slight change. Because usually what happens is you've got all the pieces, it may just need to be put together in a different order. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just, it's kind of like the interior designer whose house is a wreck, but everybody else looks great. And sometimes you need, the best
Yeah.
coaches have their own coaches, the best leaders have their own leaders to help them
Yeah.
through these.
Um, Speaking of permission, and this is changing gears just a little bit, but I just want listeners to hear some advice that you gave me recently because I know someone out here needs to hear these words because I did. Sometimes you need someone to give you the permission, and you said it so well to me last week. Stop outsourcing your power to others and to lean into your own voice. And I would love to just talk for a few minutes with you about that, about what that has looked like for you, how you coach other people through that type of exercise. And this was in the context of podcasting, even of you telling me,
Yeah.
hey, I want to hear more solo cast from you. I want you to start using your voice more. And that was fantastic feedback. But just the way you put that was so beautiful that I think it can apply to a lot of people in a lot of different positions.
Wow, thank you for that. And it's funny because I'm like, hey, outsource it to a coach, but also no. A part of it is finding the right coach, and I know for me, like some of my triggers, I'll give you a story. I was looking for a life coach, and this was, I don't know when, it was maybe a year ago. And I was like, I've never gone to a life coach. I've had therapists. So therapists kind of look backwards, coaches help you look forward. And I spoke with somebody where I'm like, she looked great. Website looked awesome. And I was like, I want somebody who's like straight, direct shooter, somebody who runs a business, who
Mhm.
understands business, can just go for the jugular and just help me figure out all of that. So I talked to this woman, and she sounded fine. And then she sent me a proposal. I don't know how many pages it was, but it was all of these analysis kind of breaking down everything that was wrong with me. And by the way, none of it was all word salad. None of it was like clear or resonant or anything. I didn't even read the whole thing. That was not the right fit, especially for somebody like me who's like, and I even told her, like, hey, I don't think I'm broken. I want to figure out, like, how do I move forward? And everything she shared was all the stuff that was wrong. And none of it made any sense at all. And for me, it was like a hell no. And part of that was like the intuitive, of not outsourcing my power. And so, I've been in a season now where I have pruned all of the mentors and advisors and coaches that I have, where I'm only working with people that are allowing me to kind of access my own power, not like, hey, you need to do this because you're really bad at this and you need to get better. This is something you need to do. You need to overcome this. Everything was like, hey, use your gifts and your talents in this way. This is where you need to go. So I think what we were talking about when we spoke, Lindsay, last week was, I had to decide I can't outsource my power. And so everything that I'm doing now is kind of deconstructing my podcast, which I've just, when this comes out, it will be rebranded. My podcast, my blog, my coaching, my entire business, because I'm kind of taking the formula out of it because I feel like the formula no longer works. What gets you here will not always get you there. And that's been a really exciting and also terrifying prospect because I'm taking the reins off and knowing, like it requires a bit of trust in myself and trust in my higher power and figuring out what that looks like. But I am sensitive to not outsourcing my power. Like I'm just not that good at it. Just figure
Mhm.
something out. But if it's not my voice, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, props to you because you're literally walking the talk, right? You are stepping into a new season for yourself of reinvention as you turn behind you and teach others how to reinvent themselves. And I think that's a really powerful way for us to end today in talking about the fact that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to reinvent your creations, and to know that you have that ability, especially the more you tap into your own intuition and your power to do it for yourself. So Allison, I always end with the same question for everyone. It is the question that my family ends the day around the dinner table. And we ask, what is one thing that made you smile today?
Oh, um,
Oh, you're like, oh, I don't know that I've smiled yet.
no, no, there are so many things. There are
Good,
so many
good.
things that made me smile. I'm trying to pick one. Well, I think the fact that, so I shared with you, so this is behind the scenes. By the
Mm.
time this comes out, it will already be rebranded. But I have changed my podcast name 4 times. And I have found that the name that it was late learner, which kind of was true. But I think now is the reinvention room. I came up with that like an hour ago after like wrestling of where is my next direction, and that one feels so good, especially the double entendre of room, like being in a room and outgrowing room and finding room, right?
Yes.
Finding room with
Yes.
your new where you're headed next. So that made me smile today. But also tomorrow's my 50th birthday, and there's a lot of celebrations going on, and I'm very, very excited and smiling a lot.
I'm so happy for you. Happy early birthday. I am
Thank
so
you.
excited to text you tomorrow to celebrate. I know you're going to be
Oh,
having a great big day in Atlanta. But thank you for your time today, Allison. It's been so lovely to have you on.
Lindsay, you are delightful. Thank you so much.
If you've gained some valuable insights from listening to Who Made You the Boss, there are 2 ways we ask our listeners to show us some love. First, share this episode with a friend who you know would benefit. The more we impact others, the more we can grow our resources to impact you. It's a win-win, and it helps us a ton. Second, if you'll take a moment to leave Who Made You the Boss a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, that helps us continue to create meaningful work, and it just makes our day. Thank you, listeners, for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep being the boss of your own incredible story.